So in this video, we will be primarily discussing what the terms of trade is, and we will be targeting this key knowledge area point. But before we go into the details of terms of trade, let's have a quick look at where we are at in terms of the study design. So leading up to this, we have covered 5 key areas, and the main purpose of those 5 key points is really understanding what international trade is. And as we move on from this point, we're looking at what are the factors that would influence international trade. And so we're starting with the TOT, also known as the terms of trade. Moving into this topic, there are 2 crucial pieces of information that you need to consistently remember. The first one is that the terms of trade is only related to price. And so even though the prices might fluctuate up and down, you can make an assumption that the quantities traded over a given period has remained the same. The second dot point is that it is a historical measurement. And so the terms of trade only reviews the activity that has already occurred. And if activity has already occurred, it is assumed that the final price of the good or service that we have either bought or sold has been accepted, meaning that the exchange rates have also been taken into account. As a result of this, we do not need to reconsider how the exchange rate might have affected the exports and import prices. So the definition of the terms of trade is the measure of the degree of change in export prices relative to the change in import prices over a given period of time. And now if you look at the bottom, this is how we calculate it. We are using export prices divided by import prices, and then we multiply it by 100. What you'll also notice is that we are reusing index numbers, and we've used index numbers before when we've calculated inflation rates. So as a quick reminder, index numbers are used just to avoid us having to use nominal values, because the export prices could be 4, 5-digit numbers with multiple decimals. And so we use index numbers just to get a clearer understanding of what the price point is at. And so the key relationship with the terms of trade is that we are always comparing export prices with import prices. So let's look back at the calculation, and if you isolate the specific component of exports divided by imports, then we can assume that a variety of possibilities could occur, and they can change in isolation of one another, or they may change simultaneously. So export prices individually could increase in price, they could stay the same, or they could fall in any given period. And the same for imports. It could increase, stay the same, or fall as well. Now multiple effects can occur at the same time as well. For example, export prices might increase while import prices also increase. Export prices might decrease while import prices increase. However, since we're dealing with relative prices, we need to evaluate how the prices change against one another. So based on this information, what would Australia prefer? And the answer is that ideally we would want export prices to be as high as possible and import prices to be lowering. And what that means is that for every export that we sell, we are generating more injections than the leakages that would be occurring from the purchases of imports. And through these increased amounts of injections, this also can lead to more employment opportunities as the exporting sector earns higher revenues. And if import prices are decreasing, then it also means that Australians are able to purchase more goods and services and have an increased purchasing power. So let's have a visualization of what information you would be given and what conclusions you would have to make. Typically, you'll be given the export price index and the import price index per year, and you'll be told that there's a change in either the export or import price index. And so there are 2 possible conclusions that can occur over a given period of time. The terms of trade can either become more favorable or it could be unfavorable. For the terms of trade to be favorable, it means that the export prices are higher or have gotten higher relative to a change in import prices. It could mean that export prices rose by 10% while import prices rose up by 2%. What it could also mean is that export prices have decreased by 7%, but import prices have decreased by 10%, still making it a favorable outcome. And so because we are using relative prices here, it's important that we are consistently comparing exports to imports. So in this example here, if we're measuring the terms of trade from year 1 to year 2, we can calculate the terms of trade in year 1, which is simply going to be 100. And then we can use the formula to calculate the terms of trade in year 2. And so because the terms of trade is higher than it was in the previous year, we can conclude that there has been a favorable movement, indicating that we are receiving a higher price for exports relative to the price we pay for imports. And you can do the same for year 3. And so the conclusion is that this economy has experienced another favorable movement in the terms of trade, meaning that they are receiving an even higher export price relative to their import prices. So here's an example of an exam question relating to the terms of trade. So pause the video and have a go at this yourself. And so let's do this one together. Firstly, you look at year 1 and see what the calculation is for its terms of trade, and you compare it to year 2, and without even doing any mathematical calculations, you should be able to see that the export prices has decreased while the import prices have increased, indicating that the terms of trade has experienced an unfavorable movement. And so for this one, the answer is going to be B. So now we need to consider the factors that is going to influence the terms of trade. And if the only thing we're focused on in the terms of trade is the price of exports and imports, then all we need to think about is the forces of demand and supply and how they will create changes in the prices for exports and imports. So here we have a simple diagram and we're starting at an equilibrium point. And so there are only two possibilities that will create a price increase for exports. The first one is that the demand curve can shift to the right, or the supply curve could also be shifting left. So what we find is that both scenarios is going to push up the price for exports or imports. And so now is the easy part. Since we've looked at a variety of demand and supply factors before, we can use those same factors and justify whether they will create shifts left or right in the demand or supply curve, which then we can use as information to justify whether there will be a price increase or decrease in exports or imports. And the opposite is true. If we're thinking about the factors that would cause export or import prices to decrease, then there are two other possible scenarios. The supply curve could shift to the right, creating a lower equilibrium price point, or it could be the demand curve shifting left. And so once again, we can use our knowledge of aggregate demand and aggregate supply factors to justify why prices of exports and imports may increase or decrease over any given period of time. So this concludes the first video regarding terms of trade. We've looked at the meaning, measurement, and also the factors that will influence it. In the next video, we're looking at how it's going to affect the current account balance, the macroeconomic goals, and living standards.